Hi class, welcome to week 12. So this week your persuasive speeches are due. So what I thought is I was just going to do a review of everything we've gone over the past few weeks in between my lectures, the additional information put in your lectures and readings, and the PowerPoints. So let's get started. So remember, one of the first things that we discussed is what type of claim or question do you have? So I'll go over each of these briefly, but remember, you need to put on your outline which type of question is your argument. Is it a question of fact, whether something is true or will happen? Is it a question of value? This is issues of judgment, or is it a question of a question of policy? So questions of fact, they deal with truth or the falsity of an assertion. So is something true or false? Did something happen? Did something not happen? These are questions of fact. This is a little bit different than questions of value. Questions of value deal with is something right or wrong? Is something moral or immoral? Is something good or bad? So the questions of value are a little bit harder because you're not really proving that something happened or didn't happen. This is what's inside, what we believe. Questions of fact and questions of value are both usually organized topically. Now this is different from questions of policy, which I'll go over next. Questions of policy. This is whether a course of action should or should not be taken. So if you're saying in your question or your argument, this should happen, you want us to do something, this is a question of policy. So questions of policy, you could organize these in many different ways. Topical, maybe, but there's also problem solution, problem cause solution, comparative advantages, and Monroe's motivated sequence. I already went over these a couple weeks ago in the lecture, so I'm just going to kind of discuss these briefly. So problem solution, it's as easy as it sounds. In your first main point, you document the existence of the problem, you give me evidence, and then you follow up with the solution. Problem cause solution, a little bit different. If you know that there's causes to the problem, then maybe you're going to want to show that as well. So your main point one, you document the problem. You still have evidence, right? But then in main point two, you analyze the causes. What caused this problem? And then after that, then you present the solution. So this is a little bit different than comparative advantage. Comparative advantage, each main point is going to explain why you are better than the opposition. What's great about comparative advantage is that, remember, you have to have a counter argument in your speech. If you use comparative advantage, the entire speech is essentially a counter argument. Each main point you're saying, this is why I'm better than the opposition. This is why I'm better than the opposition. So Monroe's motivated sequence, this is a great way to show that you are better than the opposition. So what you're doing is, there's 5 steps, and I went over this before, so I'm only going to briefly go over it now. But remember, you're grabbing our attention, showing that there's a need for what you're talking about, helping us visualize this need, showing that it'll work, and then you challenge us to act. So remember, I talked about this a few weeks ago. You also need convincing evidence. Every claim must be supported by convincing evidence or supporting material, such as examples, narrative, testimonials, facts, and statistics. We spoke about these a few weeks ago. If you have your own expertise, then put that in there. But remember, you are not required to be actually in the speech. If you don't have expertise, just borrow it from someone else. Let us know what the experts think about your topic. Also, like I said earlier, you must address the other side. The website procon.org is a great site to use to find counter arguments. You put in your topic and they show you who is for the topic, who is against the topic. So part of your grade, part of the ethos is showing the other side. You need a two-sided message. So what you do is you mention the opposing point of view, then you refute them. Say, I understand that the other side thinks this way. However, this is why they're wrong. So why am I making you address the other side? Well, ignoring opposing arguments, it damages your credibility. Like I said, this is the ethos part of your grade. If you look at the grading rubric, that's where this shows up. It's the ethos part. Now, you don't need to not acknowledge every counter argument. I only required you have one. But what I would say is maybe address the one that's most well known, that's most common, one that your other side will bring up. It really does make you more credible. So now that I talked about how you build your credibility using evidence, I'm going to talk about just go over logos, pathos, and ethos again briefly, and how you can put all three into your speech. So remember, a speaker's credibility plays an important role in persuading the audience. Credibility is the audience's attitude towards and perception of the speaker. So a speaker's credibility is affected by two primary factors: competence, which is how an audience regards your intelligence, your expertise, and your knowledge of the subject, and also your character, how the audience regards your sincerity, your trustworthiness, and concern for the well-being of the audience. So the first part of your grade is ethos. Ethos is what Aristotle's named for credibility. The audience wants more than logical and emotional appeals from the speaker. They want what's relevant to them from someone who cares. So audience members' feelings about your credibility strongly influence how receptive they will be to your proposals. And studies have confirmed that attitude change is related directly to the extent to which listeners perceive speakers to be truthful and competent. This is ethos. So some things to think about when I'm grading your ethos, or also called ethos. The establishment of credibility. Make sure that your appeals to emotion aren't excessive. Overwrought emotionalism undercuts credibility. Ethos isn't constant. Okay, but it's knowledge and trustworthiness, as well as the logical, reasoned argument that takes opposing viewpoints into account. Logos is Aristotle's name for logical appeals. This is your evidence and your reasoning. Logos refers to persuasive appeals directed at an audience's reasoning on a topic. Logos makes use of arguments for or against an idea or issue through these two types. You reason and appeal to logic. Logos is important in gaining agreement for your argument. It is especially critical when asking listeners to reach a conclusion regarding a complicated issue or to take a specific course of action. So this is the soundness of your argument: facts, statistics, examples, and authoritative statements you gather to support your viewpoint. You must substantiate your claim with valid, well-documented evidence that enhances the logos of your position. However, if you have all logos, it'll be boring. An entire persuasive speech of statistics, that is not enjoyable. So you also need to have effective persuasion requires emotional appeals. Speakers' emotional appeals play an important role in persuading the audience. Emotional appeals, often also called motivational appeals, are intended to make listeners feel sad, angry, guilty, fearful, reverent, pride, all of these emotions that we feel. So Aristotle, he named pathos for emotional appeals, and how to do that. To truly persuade listeners to care about your position, you must hit their emotions. Use vivid imagery, tell compelling narratives, use repetition and parallelism. Just like we talked about a few weeks ago with Martin Luther King's speech, he used a lot of language devices to hit our emotions. So pathos is, this is the sensitive side, connotative language, words and with strong emotional or overtones. These can move readers to accept your point of view. So like I said before, use emotional language, develop vivid examples, vivid narratives, and, obviously speak with sincerity and conviction. So also, don't substitute evidence and reasoning for emotions. Just like I said, you don't want an entire speech of logos. You don't want an entire speech of pathos. This is why you need to have a balance. So really quick, like I said before, use external evidence. Just to wrap up this part, audience's pre-existing knowledge or opinions, and if you have it, speaker's expertise. All right, so now I'm going to just review what we talked about a couple weeks ago about reasoning. This is drawing conclusions based on the evidence I just discussed. So you need, or you're required to have, two types of reasoning in your speech. So you can pick two of these: reasoning from specific instances, reasoning from principle, causal reasoning, or reasoning from analogy. So persuasive speakers often use reasoning from specific instances, also called inductive reasoning. When a speaker reasons from specific instances, they progress from a number of particular facts to a general conclusion. So what you need to think about, you need to be aware of jumping to conclusions based on insufficient evidence. Don't use hasty generalizations. You need to be careful of your wording. Don't overstate the facts. You need to reinforce your argument with statistics and testimony. Remember that inductive reasoning moves from specific cases to a general conclusion, but this is also based on evidence. So here's an example. My PE course last term was easy. My roommate's PE course was easy. My brother's PE course was easy. Therefore, PE courses are easy. Remember though, you need evidence. So again, with specific instances, avoid hasty generalizations. Qualify your arguments when necessary, and of course, reinforce with statistics and testimony. You can also reason with analogies. You can compare two similar cases. What is true for the first is also true for the second. Just remember, though, that your cases must be essentially alike for this to work. If you're good at tennis, you'll be good at ping pong. That might be pretty good as long as you have evidence to back it up. The third one, reasoning from principle, also called deductive reasoning. This is moving from a general principle to a specific conclusion. So one of the best forms of deductive reasoning is a syllogism, which I'll show you next. You have a major premise, all people are mortal. Then you have a minor premise, more general or more specific, Socrates is a person, therefore Socrates must be mortal. Some guidelines: you should use a major premise that your listeners will accept, and then obviously provide evidence for the minor premise. One of the best forms of reasoning from principle is the Declaration of Independence. I will have that in the lectures and readings for this week, and I will explain in more detail how that is the most perfect syllogism there is out there. The last one, causal reasoning. You establish relationships between causes and effects. You claim that one event in circumstance causes the other. Now, when you think of causal reasoning, just be sure to avoid the fallacy of false cause that we talked about a few weeks ago. Causal reasoning begins with an idea of something, the cause, an event, or circumstance, and then the reason or effects. But don't assume that just because two things follow each other, that they obviously caused one another. Because the patch of ice was there, I fell and broke my arm. Yes, that is causal reasoning. So just some quick guidelines. Again, what I said, avoid fallacy or false cause. Do not assume that events have only one cause. So you want to think about that if this is the one that you choose. Okay, so now that I just kind of reviewed what is required for this week's speeches, review some of the information in the lectures and readings, review the information about the outline, and please review the grading rubric. And then, as always, before your speeches are due, please let me know any questions you may have.